Hello and welcome to From Search to Success, Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition, also known as ETA. I'm Lori Bishop, the Associate Director for Alumni Programs and Engagement at the Rock Center for Entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School. I'm joined by my Alumni Programs colleague, Mary Rose St. Cyr. We are thrilled to bring you this session with Professor Richard Ruback, exploring a case that he and Professor Royce Yudkoff wrote on Jeff Duckworth's journey and discussed through the podcast, Think Big, Buy Small, the self-funded journey from searcher to seller. Many thanks to both Rick and Jeff for being here today and for taking the time to bring us this session. We chose this topic because at Harvard Business School, we are seeing an increased number of both students and alumni who are exploring or moving forward with entrepreneurship through acquisition as a professional pathway and alternative to traditional entrepreneurship. And on this call are many Rock Summer Fellow students who are working on ETA and building a search fund this summer. This trend is also validated with over 550 people registering for this event in the middle of summer. We wanted to make sure you knew that this session was being recorded. For our agenda, Professor Ruback will introduce the case and then offer an opportunity for you to participate in a case discussion. And then we'll hear from Jeff himself. Before I hand the mic over to Rick, just a few words about the Rock Center and upcoming events. Since 2003, the Rock Center has been the hub for entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School. We help talented Harvard Business School students and alumni envision, fund, build, scale, and invest in high-growth companies that make a difference in the world. Our center provides guidance, curated programming, and accountability through expert coaching, cutting-edge resources, active support, and a collaborative entrepreneurial global community. We are just one part of a larger ecosystem and collaborate with other organizations within Harvard Business School and across Harvard, like the Harvard Innovation Labs and the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences and beyond. For more about the Rock Center, check out our website, which we're excited to announce is being redesigned as we speak, or reach out directly if you have any questions. And be sure to follow the HBS Arthur Rock Center for Entrepreneurship on LinkedIn. We'll be posting about our next virtual event shortly, which will be presented through LinkedIn Live on August 6th from noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Harvard Business School faculty member Archie Jones will speak on the topic of venture capital and private equity. We encourage you to post about our session today on LinkedIn, and if you do, be sure to tag us. Let's move on to our program. Rick Ruback is a Baker Foundation professor, a Willard Prescott Smith Professor of Corporate Finance Emeritus, and has been at the Harvard Business School as a faculty member for 37 years. Together with Royce Yudkoff, he teaches 2 courses about small business in the elective curriculum. They also have co-authored a book about how to buy a small business. You can read his full bio online. I'll now hand it over to Rick to get started. You are on mute, Rick.
Here we go. That's better. Thank you so much. It's a delight to be here. Thank you guys for all giving up a lunch hour on this lovely summer day. This session is really about our very first podcast. Royce and I have begun a podcast journey, which has been fascinating for both of us and really interesting. This is our first season. You can, it's called Think Big, Buy Small. You can get it on Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Jeff Duckworth was the very first of the podcast guests that we've had. And so instead of teaching a case today, I thought it would be fun for all of us to just delve into this 2020s media and learn a little bit about search and about the acquisition process through Jeff's journey, and learn about Jeff's journey through a podcast instead of a paper case. Easy to listen on your way to work or with your puppy. That's what I have with your puppy than reading a case on a summer day. So with that, let me just drive in. I'm going to run this a little bit like a case discussion. We do have a lot of people, so I ask that you participate by using that raise hand function. So can everybody find that raise hand function? Where is it? It's Zoom keeps changing, but I think it's under, is it under the react button? Yeah. So there you go. Raise your hand. So you got it. So so let me just begin with my very first question, and this is really the big question that I've heard from my family members who've listened to the podcast. They always ask the same question, which is, why would somebody give up a perfectly good job, a prestigious job, a well-paying job in consulting? Why would somebody have just moved their family, have a consulting job that's paying them well? Why would they give all that up and go search? So what do you think? What do you think was in Jeff's mind? We have Jeff to fact check us, but what do you think? What do you think? Any amateur psychologists or economists in the room? I'll wait. Let's see a hand. I can cold call too, right? Carmen.
So perhaps looking for more autonomy and leadership and faster access to generational wealth.
Yeah, so make more money, control his life. Azita, did I say your name right?
Perfectly right. Yes. Good afternoon. I
Yeah.
would say what was going through Jeff's mind is what went through my mind when I left venture capital and went to the startup fulfillment. The fact that I could make faster decision, the fact that I did not have to go through layers in order to get permission to do something that I thought was innovative. So I would say Jeff was perhaps driven by faster decision making and being able to do innovative actions without having to go through corporate approval process.
So being your own boss, being your own
Being
boss,
your own
being able
boss,
to
yes.
make your decisions and not have to ask if they're okay. You know, I gotta say, I have two views on that. One is that I think when you're deciding whether you want calf or decaf coffee, that's a really good thing, right? Being able to make that decision without asking somebody, that's really important. But, and that goes for a range of other things. But on big strategic decisions, don't you think it makes sense to have a sounding board, a board of directors, some committees, some other group of people that you have to bounce those ideas off? Or have I been at a big institution like Harvard so long, I think you can't make any decisions without a 3-year study? What do you think about that? Azita?
Definitely having a sounding board is necessary, and that's where we have hopefully a good board of directors or board of advisors, or we join community of maybe HBS alumni who are in the same stage of life and career, so we can use them as a sounding board.
Yeah, so I think that is really important. I do think that's important. But on the other hand, I also get the idea that when you own your own small business, one of the things you get to do is make decisions and own those decisions, for good and for bad. When they work out, you get to put more money in your pocket. And when they don't work out, you get to fix them. Any other thoughts? There's one issue I think that's really interesting here. What did Jeff like least? Marianne, what did Jeff dislike least about his job?
So I was going to answer what's the last thing that might be a consideration and not this question. So I think that there is a perceived reduction of risk when you buy a company that's already up and running and is cash flow positive, and maybe even has already gotten a tremendous amount of profitability, and that you can see a skill fit with your skill base, and you can actually have some vision to say, well, I can grow this with, I can see like a path without that maybe they didn't see, or that they didn't want to do because it was too much change, or they were ingrained in their systems already. So I think a perception of reduced risk is my answer.
Yeah, the risk thing is really interesting because, since it's the Rock Center, people think about the risk as startup risk versus the risk of buying a business. But what Royce and I see mostly is questions about traditional jobs versus the entrepreneurship path or the search path, because the search path is far less risky, as you point out, than the startup path. And one of the things Royce and I always like to talk about, because our students lose track of this, particularly, we work with about 200 MBAs a year, and we always hear the same thing, which is, boy, I can take a job with company X, well-established McKinsey, Bain, whatever, consulting company or a financial services entity, and I'll have a good steady job and I won't have any risk, or I can do this and have risk. And our answer to that is, when you buy a small business, first of all, you get to pick the level of risk by picking the business. You can pick a business like Jeff did, which had relatively low risks, or you can pick a business which is a B2C business that might have higher risks, higher rewards, but you can control the risk a little bit by the business you buy. But it's not that it, but the other point that we think is really important is that risk is sort of inherent in a business career. What is different when you run a small business is that you have visibility into those risks and you get to manage them. Whereas in big businesses, the risks are still there. They just don't tell you about them until you get the axe, or until it's a miserable outcome and you're doing something you don't want to do. So I think that I think you're exactly right. There's a visibility and control of risk that you have when you buy a small business that you just don't have when you're part of a bigger organization. Had a couple other hands up. Ron, in response to the question of what he liked least?
So I'm not sure exactly, but I was thinking that perhaps Jeff could manage his work-life integration just a little bit better by being the owner, maybe a little bit more locally, and when he does travel, it's on his terms, maybe managing it in and out of his life with his family.
Yeah, you got the sense that he hated all the traveling associated with consulting. Now, it's interesting, what we hear now is people leaving consulting, going to search because they hate all the Zooming. So there's less traveling, but if you're a consultant, you might be spending 6 hours in meetings on Zoom. And I don't know if that's the same as a concussion, but having experienced it, it sort of feels like a concussion. I'd rather hit my head in a chairlift than spend a week 8 hours a day on Zoom. So there is a sense that there are pieces of the job that you just didn't like. And the reason I want to emphasize that is, and maybe Andrew, I'll emphasize that with you, that has a role in his search strategy, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And there are a few topics kind of swirling around here. One is the risk decision. The other is, why on earth would he give up a good job to want to do this? I was search fund number 7, I think, back in 1992, and here was my calculus. I was coming out of HBS, was sitting on an offer from a well-known consulting company in their San Francisco office, and at the same time, kind of thinking about, boy, fee-for-service businesses are kind of a hard road. You eat what you kill in any given year, and guess what? You got to get up and do it all again next year and find some new clients, and essentially you're paid by the hour, albeit that the hourly rate may be pretty spectacular. For me, it was partly about control of destiny and so on, but it certainly was partly about economics. It's hard to make real money in this world other than having an equity stake in a business where there's strong value creation. And I'd argue fee-for-service consulting, you're not really, you may be paid well, but you've got to do it again next year, and you're really not building any equity value. On the risk factor, it's interesting. I thought about it as, boy, there is never a lower risk time to be giving this a shot. And the big risk is, what if I can't find a company? What if I can't get a deal done? What if the deal isn't successful? But at the time, early in career, that was an easier kind of risk factor to digest. You know, you wind the clock forward and you're 10 years into a career, married, 3 kids, a mortgage, and life kind of catches up with you. And the risk of getting off the bus, not taking a lot of income for a while whilst you're finding a company, you know, for me, that's a much larger risk. So whilst there's always an advantage of waiting and accumulating more experience, your risk profile is working against you if you wait too long.
Yeah. What are you waiting for, right? What are you waiting for? Doug?
Yeah, I think maybe one of the things, you know, what you're most surprised about, perhaps, I would think, is you're now going from a big company, GE or whomever, McKinsey, and you go into a little manufacturing company, and you're saying, "Oh my God, what am I doing here? I'm not dealing with any MBAs. I'm dealing on the factory floor.
Who do you have lunch with? Who do you have lunch with?
Who do you have lunch with? You're in a weird place. You're dealing with QuickBooks. You don't have benefits that are right, and you don't have anyone to go to on a day-to-day basis." So I think that's one of the things that it's quite not risky, but it's apprehensive. And you're starting to lose your network of people that you've been hanging around with for 5 years, 10 years, whatever, into a totally probably different crowd.
I think that's right. I think that's right. What about losing the prestige of it all? You know, you've also lost some prestige. I'm working for a name brand, household name brand firm, and now I'm going to go, in his case, buy a rock smashing equipment business, right? It's you know, there's a drop in prestige there, right?
There is, yeah, and it's not an easy thing to describe in 2 seconds at a cocktail party.
No, it isn't.
And so you could say, McKinsey, you're done. You start about rock smashing. You're 10 minutes into it, describing what you do and why you did it.
Yeah.
So there definitely is a psychological aspect of it, but you know, you got to cut your own path.
You got to cut through that. Alessandra.
So yeah, true. Well, I love the Doug's perspectives. You lose on one side for sure some prestige, but what you gain is the long-term feedback on your actions. For example, you can gain as many touch points with your customers, seeing the effect that your action and your decision as an entrepreneur in a smaller company can have, even in the long term, not only building wealth in the long term, but just seeing what is your impact in the long term is easier. It's not a consultancy project that starts and finishes, and then the team changes, customer changes.
Yeah, you
Just
get
more.
to see it through the end. You get to see it through the end, and that's really important. This is going to be a name I'm going to struggle with. I'm not even going to try your last name, but Karan, is that right?
Yes, thank you. It is Kiran Govindaraju. And I echo Doug's comments. It hit the right spot. I exited as a CTO, managing $150 million in budget every year for a company, financial services company. And I have gotten started on my own entrepreneurial journey. And my budget is 150,000. And feel every day almost my life has come a full cycle, turn around, started all the way from the basic, what I started out 25 years ago. So it's a different experience. Every day you feel like, man, what am I doing? Questioning yourself. And it's an easy decision to go back to corporate America. So just keeping it.
Quit to say you've had enough and go back.
Yes.
Because every day you fail until you succeed.
Yes.
That's what's so hard from search, right? Is you fail over every day. If you come home and you keep score and your dog asks you, "Hey, what'd you do today?" and you say, "I failed." again, right?
And
I
it's
mean,
no
you
pay.
can't frame it that way. You can't frame it that way. You can't frame it that way. You have to say, I contacted so many companies. I had these many interesting conversations. I learned about this. I learned about that. I thought about this. I'm going to do this differently tomorrow. You
Yeah,
can't
and
think about every day I don't buy a company, I'm a loser.
yeah, and everyone close by are used to a lifestyle, and now I'm disrupting that and making them understand no pay, no holiday.
Yeah.
It's harder.
Like, yeah. Like your family.
Yes.
Yeah. It is. Search can be very hard on one's family. We have heard. Royce and I run a session every year in the spring where we have a panel of family members come to our class and talk about what the impact of the search was on their family. And much like today's session, we run it on Zoom, and we get about 150 or 200 parents and in-laws and uncles and cousins who want to know why their loved one is even thinking about doing this crazy thing when they could get a real job and start with the rest of their life. Why? And military families are like, isn't this just another deployment? Why am I doing another deployment? If you wanted to do that, you should have stayed a Green Beret. You should have stayed a Navy SEAL. You should have stayed in the Army. You should have stayed a helicopter pilot. Why are we going to do this 2 years of misery? You're supposed to be making money and living in a big house in the burbs or a small condo in the city and going out every night. Why are we doing this? Why are we suffering? Yeah.
Yeah, I sat them all down and had a conversation. The ones that are most impacted, kids, spouse,
Yeah.
brother, sister, and told them I'm going to do this for 18 months. And if I don't, then I'll come back and talk to you guys. So until then, don't bother me.
And how far are you in it now?
9 months now.
All right, so you're about halfway through. Have you found anything interesting? Not to buy, but
Yes, I have. I am getting closer to pitch and raise capital to buy a small shop that's into coffee. It's a coffee shop.
good. Well, good luck with it. Good luck with
Thank
it.
you.
Good luck with it. I want to move ahead, but Ivan, let me get your comment and then we'll move ahead.
Yeah, I think there is a certain emotional aspect, and there is certain non-rational aspect in entrepreneurship and being a search founder. I think it's a sort of a bravery to be there alone, to win the battle, to build a company. It's much, I mean, I perceive it as a much more brave thing to do than working and getting the monthly paycheck. So it's I'm HBS 2004, and in our years, entrepreneurs were the heroes. I mean, not the consultants, I'm sorry, not the investment bankings, the entrepreneurs who were building something. They were the heroes, and that's sort of the emotional aspect of it, I guess.
Yeah. And what about when you buy the business? One of the things I think that was really interesting that I got out of the podcast is when you buy the business, you got a sense of where Jeff got his fulfillment. Because he gave up this prestigious job and now he wasn't getting fulfillment by his prestige and being able to tell people, oh, I'm a consultant for this famous firm, but he's getting his fulfillment from other sources. So where is his fulfillment coming from? Because I think this is a really important piece of the story. Now understands why people want to do this. Where's the fulfillment coming from? Thoughts? When Jeff went home at night, what do you think made him happy? Not the 2-hour drive, I know that. But what else? What do you think made him happy? David?
I think it boils down to purpose. Purpose in our careers, purpose in our lives, and going to the notion of intention, which is that, do you intend to be a corporate person for your entire career? Or do you intend to change the world like we're taught to do at HBS? And a lot of us find that entrepreneurship is the path, and perhaps search funds or searching is a less risky way than doing a startup.
Yeah, but David, he wasn't sort of coming up with some new device. He was enhancing the management of a business that sold an existing device. So where's the purpose in that?
The purpose is to find efficiencies in that small business and to be able to make impact more so than if you were a consultant at McKinsey, for example, right? It's to have more control over the management and the strategy of that company.
Right. So his purpose is his control, but do you think about that like he gets fulfilled because he goes home and says, I reduced waste, I improved my inventory management system.
I think it's a long-term game, because if you jump into entrepreneurship, whether you do search or whether you do a startup, it is about having that path to kind of change the world in a way that you can make a unique difference towards, right? So I think if you take a long-term perspective on what that is, and you stick with that path, then you'll take that path towards that goal.
Read.
So I can only speak to my own personal experience, and I bought a bunch of scruffy little businesses in the 80s and 90s. So my information is dated, but the most fun part of coming home was to think about the extraordinary contributions from the unpedigreed folks within your organization. My scruffy little businesses could never hire the kid from Princeton. But by God, if you got a high school kid with a great attitude, I had, some high school education kids facing off with some Mitsubishi engineers, and they would kick the ass of the Mitsubishi engineer. And there's absolutely nothing more satisfying than that particular event. And I've got 400 stories, and I'll shut up because my daughter says I talk too much.
No, I don't think you talk too much, because I think you got that exactly right. That is what Royce and I hear over and over and over again, that no matter how dull the business, you have employees, and you have a really important role in the lives of your employees, giving them a job, giving them a safe job, giving a job the workers feel empowered and fulfilled at. Those are things that entrepreneurs take joy in. They feel good about doing that every day. That is a huge source of fulfillment, I think, on this journey. And when you're a consultant, it's not that you don't do that. It's that it's pretty far away from what you see. You don't see it. Whereas when you own the business and you have, I don't remember, Jeff, I know you told us, but I don't remember how many employees you had. I'm guessing under 50, maybe 25. He probably knew every one of his employees and knew their families, and would have a, annual gathering, holiday party, whatever it might be. And you get to know those family members, and that's really important. That's really important. So I think that is a huge source of fulfillment. Other sources of fulfillment? Thoughts? We have 250 people. Certainly somebody has a thought here.
I think Azita has her
Azita, what is it? What is your thought?
Two thoughts. One is I would like to echo on what Reed just said. Hiring somebody who's 21 years old and they may not have another opportunity, or nobody has looked upon them, and then watching them grow, and watching them buy their first house and having families started, and over time watching their journey through life, and to see where you met them and where they end up. Of course, it's their own content, it's their own talent, by being able to recognize that unpolished diamond and be able to help them get to fulfill their dreams and their lifestyle is incredibly fulfilling. And second thing is that problem solving. When you're running a small company, every day you have a problem that you have to solve. That problem solving is tremendously fulfilling.
Right, and it could be big problems, small problems, or different problems every day.
Correct.
And sometimes you see the same problem in a different outfit on different days, but you got to solve the problems. And you can't say gee, let's go do a 3-month study and come back to deal with this, because you have to solve the problem often that day for that customer for that minute, or you're going to lose it. And what's really interesting, we'll talk about the business in a minute, but what's really interesting in this business is that I think Jeff's success had a lot to do with his ability to solve customer problems. Rod? Rod?
All right, let's try that.
There you go. That sounds better.
Thank you. So I think it's, once you get comfortable with the business, it's a really interesting laboratory that a stable company gives you a chance to very quickly experiment with, not only business, marketing, other decisions, but say, how do you impact the lives of your people? And I know some folks commented on the responsibility. We did some things with our business where we brought mindfulness down to the shop floor, introducing hourly folks to the types of experiences that people on this call, we don't necessarily take for granted, but it's not unusual for us to have a very expensive resource teach us about how to communicate or absorb data or interact with people in a constructive way. Whereas if you make,
I have Royce.
Hey, we've all got gifts, right? But if you're making $22 an hour, you may go through a whole career or a whole working life and never learn how to have a constructive listening conversation.
Right.
And that's just, I think that's an incredible level of satisfaction you'll never get in other environments.
I'm so glad you said that, because one of the things, we have a lot of students at the Harvard Business School that have military backgrounds, and a lot of them take our course. And one of the things that happens is that they always talk about counseling their workers, because that's something the Army teaches them how to do. And they recognize that if the people you depend on to get the product done are not in the right place, they can't do the right kind of work that you want. So that's part of the problem that you have to solve. People always ask us, we always ask our guests, we have guests on almost every case class that Royce and I teach. We always ask them at lunch. We don't want to do this in public. I guess this is close to public, but we always ask them, what is it that we should have taught you at the Harvard Business School? Did you need more finance or more accounting? And they always come back with the same two things: sales and HR. Teach us how to sell stuff and how to manage people, because we can learn finance. We know enough finance, but people skills are really hard. Marketing is really hard. So I echo that. Ruth?
Hello, yes. So I'd say that exponential growth is really fulfilling. So I'm currently on my search journey. I've done consulting, I've done investment banking, worked in technology, and the amount of things I learn on a day-to-day basis versus what I've done in those previous jobs is exponential. And so seeing myself grow, seeing what I've been able to accomplish, and understanding that's going to continue and become a legacy that I can continue to put more equity in, that's extremely fulfilling. And for me to now be able to advise others who are also interested in this journey, it's so fulfilling and so amazing. So I definitely say that the growth you experience with going into this type of venture versus working in a corporate role, I don't think you can get that type of growth in any other company except for your own, and except for taking this type of path.
Yeah, I love that comment. I love that comment. Years ago, I had a student who had to stay around for 6 months because his spouse was engaged in some other graduate program at Harvard. The guy, it was a man, and his father-in-law was an entrepreneur, owned a bunch of TV stations, and he would buy bankrupt TV stations. And then so we turned to this young HBS grad, and he said, "Oh, you don't have anything to do for 6 months. Why don't you manage these stations?" And so the student would come to talk to me every once in a while after graduation. And the last time I talked to him, I said, "Well, how did this all work out?" He said, "Great. We made some money on this one, lost some money on this one. Overall, my father-in-law isn't mad at me, so that was a success." And I said, well, what'd you learn? And he said, well, you know, I learned all this stuff. And as I said to my father-in-law, I just wish I could have learned this with somebody else's money. And this is the point of the story. His father-in-law said to him, son, you never learn anything with anybody else's money. And I thought, well, I don't know if that's really true because I'm in the education world after all. So we like to think we teach, but I get the point, right? When you have a direct financial interest, everything is just more personal and more driven. And I get that. Hendra, I can't hear you.
Hi.
Hi, I'm sorry, couldn't hear you.
Can't you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay, great. What's usually the expectation for the from the family business owners or the small business partners when they're being acquired in the context of investment advisors business? Because when we acquired them, we primarily targeted their clients list and their AUM base. So the employees and the partners or the business owners are going to be absorbed into our organizations, which also means they have to like learn to use our infrastructure and our culture. What sort of accommodations or what sort of expectations we should give them?
Well, I think it differs from deal to deal, and I think you know, it's good to have that conversation with the sellers before you begin, obviously, before you make the acquisition. And one of the hard parts about that is you never really know the business or the people involved in the business until you're in the business. And so sometimes you enter in with plans. I'm going to involve the former CEO in this way or that way, and then as time goes on, that role either expands or shrinks. So I think it's very hard to make promises there.
Well, it's not promises per se, right? It's if it's under contract. On the other hand, you know, the contract is contracts, but then we would like to have their cooperations at some period of time, at least in the beginning.
Yeah, I would be always nervous about contracting that, but we can talk about this later if you want. That's getting deep in the weeds, I think, but I would be nervous about contracting those kinds of things. Okay. Let me slide on. I want to talk about a couple other things before we bring Jeff into the conversation. The first thing is, as many of you know, there's multiple ways to fund your time when you're searching. You can raise investor capital to fund the search, called a funded search, or you can do it on your own or through your family, often called a spouse-funded search in our classroom. There are also people who just take their savings and use their savings to fund it. Jeff did this part-time. We talk a little bit about that in the podcast. But why do you think Jeff decided not to take outside capital? Why do you think he didn't seek outside capital? It's kind of an important gating element or ways of thinking about the direction his search took. Antonio?
Well, the best way to do this is through the SBA 7, as he did, because the government gives you 90% of the acquisition capital at a really low rate. So I would say it's the best way to think about it, to not give up equity on this venture that you want to hold. So that's the way he structured.
Yeah, so economics. I think economics has a big role, and some of our students cite that. Marcus, Anton?
I think it's independence to a certain reason, because it gives the opportunity, or he has more freedom. If you have investors in, especially if it goes into kind of private equity or equity investors, then you also have the responsibility you have to consider, and also you might become an operator. But who is only a very operational operator without having the freedom to operate what's like the vision as you have.
Yeah, I get that. But what is it? I think you're on the right track. But what is about his search?
No, that's all right. Thank you.
That might have turned investors.
Yes.
Obi, were you?
It's maybe the part-time that he's focusing part-time on it and not spending full-time. And it takes quite a long period of time, and there might in this period happen many things, not having the focus on it, and it's difficult, so to say, to steer or to see progress on a more tracked base.
Yeah, so some of it was the part-time, but I think that's sort of a consequence rather than a cause. I mean, what was it about his search, his planned search, that I think was very unique, not unique, but very special, and made it really hard to get investors?
I think for me it was probably just maybe it wasn't big enough, or just the for as an investor is, you kind of look at it and what is the runway, how quick to exit would this potentially be? And I think when you look at that and you kind of worry about that, you might say, you want to sit that out. But I also wanted to say, from kind of the searcher's perspective, for me, I just kind of started my search about 6 months ago. As you say, I'm a spouse-funded searcher, and
good for you.
And I look at it from a control perspective. I also look at it from just level of comfort. While I've worked in corporate America for God knows how long, I was HBS 2005. I still feel that this is the first time I'm going to do this. I want to be able to, outside of the economics, outside of the control, I want to just be able to take my time to learn what I need to learn, to do what I need to do, to make sure that I'm just answering to myself, versus having investors calling me every night and checking out, oh my God, the ROI is not looking great, or this or that. And then sometimes you end up making decisions that might not be necessarily for the long-term benefit of the business, because you're looking at the more immediate ROI and the path to exit. So that's kind of the reason why I'm not considering investors for this first time.
So because it's you want to buy a business that you like, not that the investors
exactly.
And you want to run it the way you want. I mean, you might take capital, depends on the size of the business, but you might take capital at the time of the acquisition, but then you know the business and you pick the investors.
Exactly.
You want to run it in the style you want to run it. I agree with I get all that. There was just something about Jeff's search that I think made it really hard to take outside investors. I got one more time and then we'll stop playing 50 questions and I'll tell you what. Carolyn?
Could it have been that he was very geographically focused?
Yes, he wanted.
And investors, they don't typically like that.
Yeah, he wanted to be an hour from where he lived, and he lives in the Boston area, so Boston's a big place, but still, it's a relatively small geography, even relative to like New England or the Northeast, right? So he's not, it's so small, it was going to be hard to bring investors in. I think you have it 100% right.
And I think he tried to counterbalance that a little bit by not getting too picky on the industry, because if you're picky on the geography and the industry, you're just going to not have deals at all. Like the options will be very narrow.
Right. So what do you think about a kind of geographic search? Do you think, or an industry search, an industry narrow search? I mean, what do you think about a narrow search? Is that something that you think is really goofy? Or is that something that you think, hey, it's your life, your search, your 2 years, your money, do what you want?
Yeah, I think there are pros and cons. I think if you're willing to maybe spend a longer time searching because you want to be in a specific geography and you don't want to move your family or for whatever reason, and you don't really care about, or you have means to like support yourself in the meantime, he worked part-time to solve that, or if you have some way that you are okay that it takes longer, then maybe that's okay. But I think if you're trying to do this in a short amount of time and get a deal done, you're probably going to have to expand where you're looking. I don't know. I think it's appealing in theory, but there are definitely trade-offs that you have to consider.
Yeah, and you're searching a different way, for sure. But I really kind of like the industry or geographic focus, because I think it gives you you know, how do you eat an elephant, as the famous saying goes, you know, one bite at a time, right? And I love that you can say, okay, I'm going to take this bite that's near my house. And if that doesn't work, I'll take a bigger bite. And if that doesn't work, I'll take even a bigger bite. Or, you know, I'm a biologist. I studied biology as an undergraduate or in graduate school, and I want to buy a business in which I use that skill. A few more comments, and then I want to hear from Jeff. Kristen.
Yeah, it feels like I'm right back in your classroom 5 years ago. So this is
There
fun.
you go.
From
well, I guess it couldn't have been too miserable. You wouldn't have come back today.
There you go. I was just going to comment on exactly your perspective on an industry focused search versus a geographically focused search. So I just launched a self-funded search because I'm focused in the Denver geography. And what I'm finding is the strategy is just different. I'm really leaning into the fact that I'm investing in a local business and I want to be a part of the community. And the strategy of the search itself is also, it makes it a lot easier to meet people organically and go to events that have the intersection of the community and the business, which is a completely different strategy, no better or no worse than getting into a particular industry and then doing a geographically agnostic search to that industry. You just build up knowledge and networks along the way, just in two different ways.
Yeah, one of our former students who searched in Houston said the trick to a geographic search is never having lunch alone. That you just talk to everybody and you tell them your story and you try to, right? It's just like, it's almost like belly to belly sales, you know, it's while the national search is big email campaigns and boiling the ocean, this is about looking the person in the eye and saying, do you know somebody? Do you want to sell your business? Do you know somebody you want to sell the business? I'm at the Chamber of Commerce meeting next Monday. You know, I'd happy to get together for lunch afterwards, right?
Yep, precisely.
Yeah, Stephen.
Yeah, I was going to say that the geographic search, you know, especially if it's near where you live, it allows you to kick the tires and you can have a series of meetings with some of these entrepreneurs. A lot of the people that are selling aren't sure if they're selling, they're nervous about it. And that geographic proximity, I think, allows you to build trust and get a better sense of the business, which is very important to a successful outcome.
I think that's right. I think people who do geographic focused searches make many more site visits than people who are doing national searches, because you don't have to spend 3 days to get in a plane. You get in your car, you drive there, you see the place. And I don't know, if like when you look at a house, sometimes you drive by the house, you don't need to see the inside. Companies are not quite like that, but you learn a lot just by seeing them. So let me turn this over to Jeff. Jeff, we've asked a lot of questions. We've tried to play amateur psychiatrist for a while. But I think it's really interesting to ask the question. You're at this moment where, once again, you're facing this question of whether to search or take a job or be an investor or do something else. How are you thinking about that differently this time?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Rick. It's a fun process.
Yes, I mean, where I'm at right now, I mean, I think when I think we talked about it a little bit in the podcast, but Royce had a great term called non-specific anxiety, I think it was. Freeform anxiety.
Freeform anxiety, yeah.
So I think the day I closed the sale on the business, I mean, I just was like, you know, all that sort of vanished. And I was like, you know, I just want to go get a job and just, you know, collect a paycheck for a while. And you talk about that kind of risk of buy a business versus have a job. And I'd say over the past several months, that's sort of evolved a little bit, you know, all the good reasons that people brought up in the conversation about why buying a business is better, you know, are becoming more clear to me as the freeform anxiety becomes more of a distant memory. You know, I'm sure the mothers on the call will, you know, comment how they've forgotten about how uncomfortable childbirth was and they went back for it a second time. So I'm currently searching. Now, how I'm approaching that search this time, I don't know, it's fairly similar. I'm pretty loose on industry. I would like to, you know, be in an industry that, you know, would take advantage of my technical background and some of the work that I've done recently. I might have a little bit looser of a geographic focus, largely because I think I'm searching for a slightly larger opportunity. And so if it was a business that had multiple locations around the country, maybe at least with 1 or 2 locations within the region here, that would sort of suit me. And then I could pop around to the other places. And or more importantly, I think, Rick, you said it, you know, a man with 2 offices never has to go to work. But in terms of, I mean, I think a couple of things that struck me, I think there were like a lot of people had really sort of right on the money sort of thoughts and comments about kind of how things go, you know, faster decision making, sure. More money in the long term, yeah. In the short term, I don't know if that's necessarily true. Rick, you talked about the loss of prestige. And I think, you know, like that's sort of the picture of my career has been kind of like a general persistent stepwise decrease in prestige. So I started my career with NASA and then went to work for a, you know, globally recognized consulting firm, then transferred to a different, less recognized, less prestigious consulting firm, and then started smashing rocks. And I would say that with each step down in the prestige, my personal enjoyment increased. I found I was working with people that I liked better. There was less ego involved. I think there was less ego required of me. And I was, you know, able to find fulfillment from things that were not the prestige of the business card. And so, but for me, I mean, and part of the reason I didn't take, we talk about outside money, part of the reason I didn't take outside money is because I think when we talk about fulfillment, I mean, I've never really gotten fulfillment out of a business card. I get fulfillment out of a powder day and sailing the boat and having fun and having dinner with my family. That's how I get fulfillment. And having friends, you know, whether they're at work or not, they don't have to be at work. So that's where I find fulfillment. And that's what I was hoping to achieve by owning my own business, particularly without outside investors, because I didn't want to necessarily have to be forced to sell the business. I mean, my original plan when I bought the business was that we would do, you know, I would get it kind of squared away, put a general manager in place, and then kind of like, you know, maybe look for the next thing, or, you know, if it was big enough, just go skiing. And we didn't quite get there, but, you know, I also didn't really want to have to like answer a bunch of questions about, you know, I mean, I bought the business 6 months before COVID. And I'm sure that there were a lot of people who have boards of directors who during COVID were having to answer a lot of kind of just completely ridiculous questions from their board about why the business has decreased. And you're like, well, I don't know if you noticed, but there's some outside factors that are affecting the business performance right now. And doesn't mean we're not going to try to like work, you know, around them and mitigate for them and continue to operate the business effectively. But like, can we stop like kind of asking stupid questions and just get to work? And then I don't know if that's really true of how it actually works, but it was sort of my perspective at the time. And then I think another factor was, you know, I have sort of my own sense of what ethics as a business owner should look like. And I don't know if, I mean, I think that a lot of the comments in the room today were echoing similar ethics, but not all of them. And, you know, and I think one of the things about a board of trustees is, or not trustees, a board of directors, you know, or even advisors would just be like, you know, the importance of making sure that you're aligned, not only in terms of having a board that's got the skills to be helpful and useful, but also aligned on just things like simple business ethics, which are not universal, I think. So, you know, that's kind of where the fulfillment for me, I mean, I really like the comment about whoever had said something about, you know, learning from the guys that aren't pedigreed. I mean, I had a few guys working for me who had like, I think 4th grade educations. And I had one guy working for me who, you know, had pretty limited English and, you know, I don't think any education. And I learned more from those guys than, you know, I've learned from a lot of people in a long time even in, you know, the big consulting firms. So let's see, I was kind of looking through notes here. Yeah, so those are kind of like things that jumped out to me in the conversation. Anything else you want to hit on, Rick?
Let's just see if there's any questions. Any questions from for Jeff? while we have them? Antonio.
Hi. Just to mention, I'm a searcher too, self-funded for 2 years. And I would like to know how you got to pay 3 times multiple. That's a really amazing deal. And I always do like lowering expectations, like at least offer 2.5 times. I think that's a rule of thumb to come out with a lower base. That I will offer you like something about this, but how was this experience, and how much knowledgeable was the owner of the business about any comparable?
So I think
also motivation. Sorry, the motivation
Yeah.
for him to sell.
I think he was motivated. I think he, you talk about people without pedigrees. This guy was the definitive guy without a pedigree, but the business I bought from him was the 4th business he'd bought and sold. So, the guy just had like a kind of real, like visceral sense of how to do business. He understood like value-based pricing instead of cost-based pricing in a way that like business consultants don't understand it. He just like was just super good at that. But I think he also understood that the business was getting to a point where like, his sort of seat of the pants type management style wasn't going to work anymore. So that was a convenient time for him. But there were some significant barriers to getting the deal done that sort of drove a lower multiple. Specifically, he was theoretically doing accrual accounting, but he was expensing all of his inventory, and we had quite a lot of inventory. So it took a lot of work to, in diligence, try to unpack what the actual inventory on hand was, because there was no inventory management system. And then unpack how to unwind that from the P&L and sort of backcast the P&L to somewhere that was reasonable, and get it to some place that we understood it, and then also get it to a place that a bank would underwrite on it. And I think that was a pretty significant sort of barrier to higher multiples. Like a lot of banks, I think, weren't even interested. Like once I kind of talked to them about that, like several banks were just like, we're not going to be able to underwrite that. So I think there's a few things that sort of contributed to it. He was motivated, and then there was, the guy made some money on the deal. So at the long term, it doesn't really matter. The other thing I'll say about multiple, I feel like, is, of course, like the multiple or the purchase price, is certainly one side of the equation of ROI, right? But I don't know. I mentioned the word ego a couple of times. I feel like in my monologue, I feel like I try to approach most stuff without ego, and so as much as I can anyway. It's like maybe it's something I'm working on, but whatever. And so when you get to a point of a deal and like the deal is good, I don't really worry that much about the multiple per se, just so long as like the deal still works and deal pencils. And if we got to give up a quarter turn or a half a turn to like get the deal done, let's not get cheap around the edges, and let's preserve goodwill, and let's make sure that everybody, like, the deal works for everybody. If the deal is good at 3, it's still good at 3.3, like it
Maybe not at 6 or 5.
Right, 100%. But like within the noise,
Yeah.
like we're not splitting hairs.
Yeah, this valuation at this level isn't about finding the crater on the moon. It's about finding the moon.
100%.
That was a NASA reference for you, Jeff.
Yeah, NASA knows where the moon is. Yeah.
They know where the moon is. I think they actually know where the craters are too, but they're digging. The moon's bigger than these small companies. Jeff, thank you for that. That was great. I think we have to wrap up. I didn't get a chance to review the chat as we talk. My ADD only goes so far. But
Let me just add that if anybody wants a follow-up conversation, ping me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to talk.
Yeah, and also the podcast addressed some of these things. I saw some people were asking, how do you source? Where do you go? How do you do this? How does the SBA work? We actually talk about all that in our first season of the podcast. And you can email us through the podcast, Rick and Royce at hbs.edu, and reach out to us that way. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Rick and Jeff, for joining us. This was incredible. We will share the recording to everyone. We'll share the email address that Rick had just mentioned, where you can reach out to him and Royce if you have further questions, and check out the podcasts as well. Follow the Rock Center on LinkedIn. We are always posting our events as well as others, and feel free to reach out at any time. Thank you all for joining and for participating today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, again.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks, everybody.